Bulls Nation, in my last video, we discussed the topic of Ethan Thompson and Daniel Oturu being waived from the Chicago Bulls. And it brings up the new topic now with the players remaining, who's going to get the remaining contracts for the Chicago Bulls. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the players that have been playing on this roster in preseason, and we'll be discussing who's going to get that final roster spot. So without further ado, let's talk about the Chicago Bulls and their last roster spot in this video. Let's do it. What's going on, everybody? It's the Bulls Show, aka Aidan, and welcome back to another video. Today we've got a Chicago Bulls related video referring to the last roster spot on the Chicago Bulls. And no, I don't mean the two-way contract that we also have, although we will mention that slightly at the end of this video, but we're going to be talking about that main roster spot. Who's going to be the last player to get that roster spot on this bench? And if it's any of them, to be honest, we're going to be discussing all of that in this video. But before we get started, please like and subscribe to the Bulls Show. Turn notifications on and let me know in the comments below your thoughts about the last roster spot for the Chicago Bulls and who deserves it the most. Now, these are videos that we're going to be talking about solely on these two players in Matt Thomas and Stanley Johnson. These are the two players remaining that are on non-guaranteed contracts and could potentially get that last roster spot for the Chicago Bulls. Now, out of the two players, we need to discuss who deserves it the most. First, let's talk about Stanley Johnson. Stanley Johnson, in my opinion, has been given a lot of opportunities in the preseason to impress. And I think in the first game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, he didn't do too badly at all. He made his threes, he played some solid defense, and he's a big body in there that we could definitely use to help fit the cause of rebounding. And of course, being a bigger body, it does help in that aspect of not being too small for the Chicago Bulls. However, there have been games throughout this season where Stanley Johnson has not impressed. The last game against Cleveland Cavaliers is an example of this. He was not impressive at all. I don't really recall what he even did against the New Orleans Pelicans. So the reality is, with Stanley Johnson, you get your strengths and you get your weaknesses with him. I think many people can see that offensively, Stanley Johnson is probably not going to be the answer for the Chicago Bulls, because offensively, I don't think any type of offense is kind of his strong suit. He's not a great three-point shooter. I think we have better three-point shooters in his position on this team. Defensively, I think we have Derrick Jones Jr. and Troy Brown Jr. On this team as well, and they're both really solid defensive small forwards. And obviously, not to mention that we do have players that are two-way players, and I don't know if Stanley Johnson fits into that category of being a really good two-way player. He is one of the better perimeter defenders on the team at the moment, and that is something that we could take into consideration. But all in all, is Stanley Johnson the right answer? Let's look at Matt Thomas now as well. Matt Thomas, in my opinion, was very impressive in the first game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he does bring a specialty in this team that we don't really have, and that is set shooting and just perimeter shooting in general. Sometimes having a specialty in a team is something that could really be valuable in certain situations, and this is what we talked about Matt Thomas when we very first signed him. He has a specialty in this league. He's not gifted in majority of instances. However, the one specialty that he has could prove to be a good roster spot for any team in the NBA that needs his specialty in the three-point shooting, the perimeter, and that's what he could bring to this team. And I feel like this team is in desperate need of perimeter shooting. We all talked about it, and it can still come to life. The shooting is solely on Alex Caruso for the majority of the time when it comes to the bench of this team. Having Matt Thomas in there gives us another avenue in which we can use our offense, shooting the ball, perimeter style of play. And this is something that in the end, in certain situations, we may need. So Matt Thomas, he's not gifted defensively. He's not really gifted in the playmaking aspect either, but his specialty is perimeter shooting, and I think he's one of the best on the team in that instance. So, would you rather have someone that is a solid defender but not a great offensive player, or a really good offensive three-point shooter but not really good everywhere else? These are the two dilemmas we have to decide with. So, I'm going to give my opinion, and my opinion is I think if the last roster spot is available and only two players on this roster that are on non-guaranteed contracts can get it. If no one outside of these two players can get it, I would pick Matt Thomas as the last roster spot because he does bring that specialty, and that specialty is very well needed. When with Stanley Johnson, we do have players in his position that can kind of already do what he does. If we didn't have Troy Brown Jr., if we didn't have Derek Jones Jr., if we didn't have Patrick Williams, then maybe we have the conversation of we should go after Stanley Johnson and bring him into this team for some depth. And it still could be that case where he could be a very good depth player that is our third choice small forward or fourth choice small forward. But we are already filled in that area where if there is an injury that does happen, we do have other players that could take their spot. And the depth is very good in that area. With Matt Thomas, it's just a certain type of situation. We know Matt Thomas is not going to get a whole lot of game time when we have Alex Caruso, Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu. Then you have the starting of lineup of Lonzo Ball and Zach LaVine. It's guard filled. But when it comes to a specialty, when we need a three-point shot, you can put Matt Thomas in the game and you know he's going to be a good option to go to. That's the thing that I'm leaning towards. The last bench player does not need to get filled with minutes. We don't need to give the guy 15 minutes a night. Stanley Johnson might be a player that would want 15 minutes a night. I'm not sure. But with Matt Thomas, you could put him in for 4 or 5 minutes when you need those scoring options, and he can deliver in that area. So that's why I would pick Matt Thomas personally over Stanley Johnson. I think Stanley Johnson is the better player, but at the moment, I think we have players that are better than him in that position. And that's why I wouldn't give him that last final roster spot. However, we need to talk about one more avenue when it comes to that last roster spot. The two-way contract you could give to Stanley Johnson. You could even give it to Matt Thomas. The two-way contract is definitely something that should be kept valuable for the Chicago Bulls, and we should also be looking to give it out to an opportunity. If we could get Stanley Johnson on the final contract and Matt Thomas on that two-way contract, that solves a lot of issues, in my opinion, personally, with the Chicago Bulls. And maybe that's the avenue they go down. But what I'm going to bring to you now, what if the Chicago Bulls are not looking to sign either of those two players? What if the Chicago Bulls are trying to keep their last roster spot available throughout the season for potential buyouts to occur? We do know majority of the time there is at least one buyout of a meaningful player in the NBA, a player that doesn't like the situation they're in, a player that doesn't want to play for the team that they're currently on, and a player that's looking for an opportunity on a team that could be winning more games than what the team they're currently on is. So with that being said, you look at that situation, and maybe the Chicago Bulls are going to choose to be patient over filling the roster up straight away. Not every team needs to have 15 guaranteed contracts before the regular season starts. So this is another avenue where you think to yourself, the Chicago Bulls don't need to fill this roster spot now. If they don't like what Matt Thomas brings to the table, and they don't like what Stanley Johnson brings to the table, then we don't need to get both of them onto this team. We could go after one on the two-way and leave that roster spot available, or at the end of the day, we could go after both. But there is an option there where if we do see a buyout of a really significant player, or even just a really good rotational player on the team, we could look at that. We could look at that. We could try and give them some run out, and maybe, just maybe, we could give them a full contract on this team for a 1 year minimum type deal, because the buyer will eventually give them their guaranteed money anyway. So this is something that I want to provide to you, to the Chicago Bulls fans. This is something that I've been thinking about over the course of the last few days. What if the Chicago Bulls don't want Stanley Johnson on their team, but they don't want Matt Thomas either? What if they only want one and they know they could get one on a two-way contract? That last spot for the Chicago Bulls does not need to be filled straight away. At least I don't think it needs to be. So why should we rush? That's the question that I have. Again, if it's only between those two players, I would put Matt Thomas as the final spot on that contract. And again, maybe Stanley Johnson will be willing to go on a two-way contract. But with all that being said, why do we need to rush into something? Why do we need to rush into giving that last contract spot to someone? At the end of the day, there are still free agents out there that have not looked for a team or have not gotten a team. Even a player like DeMarcus Cousins is someone that doesn't have a team at the moment. He could be something that we look for down in the future because we know we need more centers. This is definitely something the Chicago Bulls, I think, will be keeping in the back of their head. Patience in that last roster spot could be very key, because down the line we could get someone that could be a game changer for the Chicago Bulls with very little money as well. So with that being said, let's see what the Chicago Bulls do with that final roster spot. At the end of the day, it could just be given away tomorrow. It could be given away by the time this video gets out to the world. but there is definitely something in my heart that says the Chicago Bulls should be looking just outside of these two players as well. It just can't be down to these two and these two alone. There needs to be more avenues, and there needs to be patience in this team to see if we could get something better down the line. At least that's what I think. Hopefully you guys agree. If not, feel free to let me know. Out of those two players, between Matt Thomas and Stanley Johnson, who do you prefer? Because it is an interesting topic, and we all know Stanley Johnson is probably the better player, but Matt Thomas probably brings something that we need. So it's a divide between two things. Would you rather have the better player? Would you rather have something that the team needs desperately in the perimeter scoring? We'll wait and see what you guys say in the comments below. But thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're new. Have a wonderful and safe day, Bulls Nation. I'll see you in another Chicago Bulls video. I believe the next video I'm going to make is the players that have been impressing in preseason and how proud I am of those players. And again, we'll be talking a lot more about that in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay tuned for more. Take care and peace.